Welcome back to Uplift Women's Wellness. I'm Bethany Bush, and with my co-host, Aria Zahed, we are diving headfirst into Season 2.
Last season, we cracked open necessary conversations: friendships, money, representation, mental health, medical abuse, and so much more. Thank you for making space for your healing.
This season is not getting any lighter. It's getting even more gritty, more honest, and more demanding of change. Because we know what it's like to feel dismissed, unheard, or stuck in the dark.
We're here to give you the honest dialogue and awareness to finally bring you out of the maze and back to your center. From reclaiming your financial power to healing your nervous system, we are demanding more for you.
This is our table, and you are always welcome here. Let's start the conversation. So today we are going into the side of physical therapy, and one of my favorite colleagues in the space that I train out of is Claire. I don't want to butcher your last name, so I'm not going to say it, but she is here today, and she's going to tell us her whole background, what got her into physical therapy, where her path went and came from, and then however she wants to lead us in from there.
Yeah, well, thank you, Bethany, for the intro, and thank you to you both, Bethany and Aria, for having me. I think what you both do is so incredibly necessary, and I really admire your work and everything that you do in the name of women's wellness, and it's something that's like very needed, I think, in the current, fitness landscape and just with where women's wellness is as a whole. And yes, so to introduce myself, my name is Claire Spivak, and that's okay. Everybody butchers my last name. They're like, I don't know if it's Spivak or Spivak. And so, yes, Ukrainian origin. But my pathway into becoming a physical therapist came a lot from my dance background. So that was kind of my first introduction into movement. My parents put my sister and I into dance from a very young age. I think when I was about 3 was when they decided, because that's, what the 3-year-olds were doing at the time, the 3-year-old girls. My mom decided on putting us into ballet, and I loved it. I love moving, and I think that was just kind of my first introduction into movement was through dance class. I loved it. I stuck with it for a long time. I wish I did have the chance to explore other variations of movement, like sports and just other sort of things. My mom, unfortunately, did not think that sports were meant for girls. So I never got the chance to experience like a sports setting or anything like that. But I did really love dance, and I stuck with it. And later I transitioned to kind of a more serious ballet school. And it was Vaganova-based training, which there's kind of various training styles in dance and ballet, and Vaganova is more rooted in like the Russian approach. And so it's quite strict, and there's very much a right and a wrong way, and it's very technical. And like, most ballet styles, it does follow a progression and a sequencing. So I stayed in this school up until I graduated high school, and I was kind of on the brink of deciding whether or not to pursue this professionally or, going the college route, since that's kind of, if you're serious about ballet, you don't typically go to college, at least not at that time. You would often audition for a company or, just look for other opportunities, because the ballet career was so short-lived. So you had to do it when you were young, or otherwise you'd miss out on opportunities and you were not as like fresh and physically able was kind of the narrative and the rhetoric. So it was that. And I did choose to, pursue education in college. And a lot of that was due to, I couldn't continue ballet professionally because of all the injuries that I've experienced. And it was injuries starting from really young, like when I was 12, that was my first injury. And it just seemed to evolve into a pattern for me where like every year was something new. It started with the hip, and then it moved on to like my feet and my toes. And so there were just various parts of my body that were impacted. And my first introduction to physical therapy was with that first injury when I was 12. And I actually really liked it. I was like, this is a new way to move. I never get to do planks or squats or just movement outside of dance. Like, this is cool. I love it. And I also really love learning about my body and the anatomy and the why. Like, that was fascinating to me, why my injury developed, what this meant for me, like what muscles were involved and how to treat it. And that was so fascinating to me. And so I was just kind of in and out of PT and various rehab providers throughout high school and throughout my injuries. And as much as I did enjoy it, I was like, well, it never fully got me back. Like, it would kind of cap off at a certain level. And, the practitioners I was working with, they didn't have dance backgrounds. They didn't really understand. They're like, well, why do you have to stand on your toes? Like, it's fine. Just don't do it. And I was like, no, but this is like what I need to do this. I'm passionate about this. And so there was always a little bit of that disconnect. So naturally, I decided that that's something that I want to be, and that's the care that I want to provide, very like dance specific. I knew that I wanted to keep dance a part of my life because it was so familiar to me, and it really brought me so much fulfillment. But I didn't end up being a dancer, but I'm still very involved in the dance world. So I went to college for kinesiology. I went to Long Beach State and did exercise science there. Loved it, really reinforced my decision to pursue physical therapy. I mean, not just like learning the anatomy and the physiology, but getting into more of the sports psychology classes. Like, that was so interesting to me. And just being introduced to the biopsychosocial model and reflecting on my past experience with injuries, with having more of that education and knowledge. And went to physical therapy school at Chapman University, and that was wonderful as well. And I had various clinical experiences, and so I got to see patients all across the spectrum, and all ages, all sort of diagnoses, anywhere from like workers' comp and different like socioeconomic statuses as well. And then I did have a clinical rotation treating artist athletes, and that was just like my calling. I loved it. And so after graduating, I joined Dance Prehab, and that's the company I'm currently at. And I absolutely love it. It was founded by Rob Tsai, who also a former professional dancer, now physical therapist, and very human-centered and very holistic. So, the work we do is physical therapy, but I think it extends so far beyond that. And we really place an emphasis on education and getting kind of all aspects of the dancer and sort of like the dancer's team involved, and recognizing that it's really just not like a physical healing only. How can we bring in other sort of professionals just to support the dancer in their longevity? And a lot of what we do too, hence the name Prehab, is preventative training, because dancers really aren't exposed to that or much of any cross training that's rooted in strength and conditioning principles and like scientific principles. They just don't have that, as opposed to other athletes who, that's like built into their curriculum. And, there's so much progress being made there. Dancers just don't have that. Or maybe the strength class they do have is taught by just their dance teacher, who may not have that background. So a lot of the responsibility like falls on the dance teacher. And yes, so hoping to instill that and kind of continue upholding the standard for just like dancer care and their strength and their sustainability throughout their careers. So they're not short-lived. Like, they can dance and they can be doing this for as long as they feel they want to, and they're not limited by, any sort of external factors. And they feel like they have the sustainability and the guidance for that, and that they're empowered to, know how to take care of their bodies best. So yeah, that is kind of my journey, and it's still like evolving. And I mean, literally with each like new day and new patient, I learn so much, and it's so interesting to be like, I am in the dance world, but I am not the dancer myself. I'm on kind of the outside of that and still like involved in the dancer ecosystem. And yeah, that gives me just an entirely different point of view. And, on the one hand, like I I really empathize with the dancer that I treat that's in front of me. And so a lot of times I'm at odds with the physical therapist part of myself and the dancer part of myself. And so that's something that, I'm constantly, I guess, challenged with.
Battling that internal monologue of like, no, this is very unhealthy or this is toxic versus like, but this is dance. And also, but you're not wrong because strength and conditioning isn't even designed for women. It's not even designed for female athletes. It's designed for male athletes. So like, it's just another layer within my world where it's not inclusive. It's not thought about. It's not taken into consideration. And yes, prehab is becoming a trendy term in my world, but can you kind of go into what that means? Because there's a lot of, everyday people walking around who don't know the prehab guys and dance prehab and like all these new types of strength and conditioning specialists / DPT / all the other people. Can you kind of break down what that even means?
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of times people think of physical therapy as more so like after the fact, I get injured and therefore now I have to start thinking about the way I move and thinking about, like what to do in order to take care of my body from a physical standpoint. But even beforehand, we know that there are things that you can start to build up. You can build up your body's capacity so that it can handle what you are asking it to do. And therefore you're set up in a much better place, beforehand. So these things don't happen. And, in dance and if in any sort of sport, it's hard to prevent injuries. I mean, there are so many things that are outside of our control, but we know that, if we start being specific with the kind of training you are partaking in, like outside of your sport or outside of your craft, then you are in a much better starting place, or you'll be able to bounce back from injury a lot quicker and just like building that resilience, for the long term. And, I think in the context of dance, that's especially important too, because like as you get older and as you develop, there's just going to be like more thrown at you, not just from like a skill standpoint, but also just more intensive. And so like a lot of times what you're doing just exceeds how much your body can handle. So if we build up like how much your body can handle, then that will put you in a better place and help you, I think, learn how to take care of your body and know what sort of things to listen to and when to slow down and maybe like when to speed up and just have that overall awareness of, if something does feel off or wrong, like you do start to develop that, I think, like internal trust and listening because you're already exposed to taking care of yourself.
I was going to ask, like, do dancers have any, like, are you allowed to have a mind-body connection or are you just execution?
Oh my gosh, that's such a great point. And a lot of times that's like so removed, like your ability to trust yourself is so removed because you are put in classes where you are constantly being told what to do. And like your teacher just supersedes like anything else. Like your teacher, you listen to them and they're almost like your brain. And so that causes a big disconnect into like, can I even trust what I'm feeling? Is this legitimate? So yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why I really love what I do and having the dancer kind of come out of that dance studio environment and into a gym space, because then they are, encouraged to be curious and encouraged to ask these questions. And a lot of times, especially when I'm first starting out with them, it feels like they feel very awkward. They have that same question as well of like, oh, I'm allowed to like have my own opinion and ask questions because, ballet, I think dance classes are very much structured into like, okay, this is what you're going to be doing. There's really no time for like questions or talking or even, fostering that curiosity about their bodies. So yeah, it does, I think, take a little bit of like that exposure and encouragement. So yes. Yeah. And then also too, when like dealing with injuries, a lot of times the teachers might be very dismissive, and that's because they're up against pressure of we have to put on the show, or like we really want this dancer who we worked so hard in like developing and can call ours to pursue these opportunities. And so there's really like there's no time to get injured. And there's a lot of that dismissive language that I hear that dancers tell me of what their teachers are telling them of like, oh, it's fine, you keep pushing through, or you'll ice it, but it's you're fine, you're okay, kind of thing, where it's not the case and can really lead to harmful path down the line. Yeah, especially like for, physically with the injury, but then definitely like psychologically of every time they do feel something, they're unsure of whether to believe that or not.
So it's a lot like this is a drastic extreme, but it's a lot like medical gaslighting.
For sure, yeah.
Where, you go to the doctor and you're like, something's wrong. And then labs, no, nothing's wrong, you're fine. So it is that gaslighting, that lost sense of faith in your own. What is that called, Aria, when you like don't have your own, like you don't believe in yourself anymore?
Well, also gaslighting, I would say, to yourself. You just don't trust yourself. You're kind of putting other people's opinions before your own, which is, I think, a little scary when it comes to children who are in athletics or dance, as an example, because they're already used to coaches kind of being their voice and being their thoughts. And if I were to like restart dance at my age, no one's going to tell me what to do. Like if I'm in pain, I'm not going to dance in that moment. I'm going to walk away and check on myself. But kids don't know how to do that.
Yes, yeah. And it does foster a lot of that black and white thinking. And sometimes because the teacher might know that, okay, I don't really know what this injury is. I don't really know how to take care of it. It's either like if they're in pain, you sit out and you're cut from, this routine or this audition, or you have to push through 100%. So, but realistically, like injuries do exist on a continuum and there's nuance. But I think, that's hard to come to terms with, especially since dancers just have such a black and white mindset.
So is it just not modifying with the times? Because like training your body, I feel like has become pretty standard model, a dry land training, if you will, kind of is slowly starting to be seen across every possible genre and sport. So it's interesting to me that dance still doesn't seem to quite like the dance, the organization itself, the conglomerate, wherever its overarching body is, doesn't seem to believe that it's also part of that where you have to train your athletes.
Yes. I would completely agree. It's very behind the times. And although we're slowly starting to see that be like integrated into their education and curriculum, it's still just not up to the standards of like what a regular strength and conditioning program would entail. And that's due to so many things. I mean, part of it is like funding, part of it is not kind of like knowing where to go to. But yeah, I would say at least in like studios and at a professional level, all of that does have to like goes down to like funding, or parents are only wanting to pay for like their dancer to be in dance class, and they don't see the necessity in other forms of training. And a lot of the times the belief is, well, the more you do it, the better that you're going to get. So we're going to, channel all of our time and energy and resources into more classes, more conventions, competitions, because that's what's going to get my dancer to be better. And that's still like, that's still the belief that is upheld. And that's why we don't see any sort of like off season or, it's all year round. And it's either like a really high ramp up or you're still functioning at like a relatively high load. So there's never that sort of like, there's no sort of ebb and flow. And so from like a rehab standpoint and a training standpoint, that makes it really hard for me to make my plans, because just when we think, you might get some downtime and therefore we can start building up your strength. It's like, oh, no, we have auditions or rehearsals for this thing. So yes, and it like, as opposed to sports, when before a game you're going to start to taper and be a little bit more mindful about your training for those couple of weeks. In dance, it's like we're getting closer to this performance, therefore we have to do more and rehearse more and just become so fatigued before the show that all the dancers are falling apart and we're just putting out fires at that point.
It just sounds like a permanent microcycle.
Yes.
Like there's no macrocycling, there's no like structure. It's just like microcycle 365 days of the year, 24/7. And no matter how much it's not proven to work, it stays. It's interesting because like, yes, there are male dancers and yes, there are men in the sport, but the numbers are so drastically different. I feel like it's another one of those things where they're women, they're fine, they're just whining. Like, they're just being whiny, they're just being annoying or whatever, like, my hip's bugging me or, but it's also, like, the life cycle is short. Like you said, you had to basically choose a career or college. You were a child. Yeah. You were a dancer, you are a dancer, because to me, if you dance, you're a dancer, so you're going to always be a dancer to me.
That identity always stays.
But it doesn't seem like longevity is about strength and bone and longevity and elasticity, and it's interesting that to still be so no, but that's a lot of sport. There's a lot of sport that is still like nope.
Yeah. I'm actually wondering, Claire, do you feel like dance, especially ballet, is a little behind because it is like an art first, and that's how people, I guess, higher up envision it, especially because it's women, and like often like the most attractive women get the, I guess, bigger roles, like more starring roles or something. Do you see what I mean? How like little girl?
Yeah, you're right. It is like, it's like a kind of a female like centric art form. But then if we look at like our roles, that's, predominantly male. Like the artistic directors and the choreographers. Historically, it's kind of like always been that way, and they're kind of the ones making the decision. And so kind of like what they put out, because it's an art, they want it to be very like aesthetically appealing, and it is like rooted so much in tradition, and like it is rooted in like gender norms and like kind of a lot of conforming. So I think it's like, yes, they want to uphold the traditions and the history. And it's just like they've been doing it this way for so long and it's worked. And therefore, like, they might not see a point in pushing past that. We are seeing definitely like a lot of changes happening within like artistic leadership. And now like more women are taking on those roles. And like, that's great. But it's still so kind of far behind like the athletic counterparts. Yeah, and also just I think like sports have a much different sort of history, and like athletes are paid so much differently, and there's like a whole culture in this country, and like so much and so much attention that goes into sports, and like very different for the arts, and therefore like the funding is they're relying so much on just donors for that. So
well, I mean, that's the first thing gets cut from elementary school and public school system is the arts and PE. They're like, oh, not necessary, but it's like, if you actually read the research, that's the only way you're going to academically succeed is if you give more time into the arts and physical education. But it's that old, like when we were fighting Russia to become the best country or the best country in the world at the Olympics. It feels like we're still there. Like brute force for everything.
Claire, I was hoping you could go into more of the aesthetic aspect, especially for little girls and what that does to them, body dysmorphia related, eating disorder related. So I think that that's really important because in general, that happens to girls and women constantly because of the media. Would you mind going into it from like a dance perspective?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And there is that is so prevalent. And I think that's existed for so long. And just of recently, I mean, it's always been recognized, but just of recently, people are speaking up and speaking out against it. And even more recently, people are now starting to kind of do something about it and have that come to the forefront. But there is very much, I think, in any sort of like aesthetic sports, and like you said, with just females in general, that emphasis on aesthetics and the ideal body type. And that's even more so like in the dance world, and even more so on top of that in the ballet world. And I think it's interesting kind of to look back at the history, because it did develop as like a aristocratic art form. And so it was only kind of like exclusive to the elite and the powerful. And so it was kind of like a representation of that. And so the body types, I think, kind of like evolved based on socio-cultural ideals. So like ballet did start off, I think it was just kind of like, more muscular and more toned individuals. And then like in the like 20s and 30s, kind of following with like the fashion ideals, and when the flapper era morphed into more of those like sleek lines and slender build and tall and lanky and long-legged. And that was even more confounded with ballet being brought to America. And George Balanchine, who is a Russian choreographer, he was kind of like the father of American ballet. And he really, really like emphasized that ballet body, and just sort of like that narrative of what's a right body and what's a wrong body and what fits into the kind of like desirable molds. And so I think that's just stuck ever since then. And even though there's been a lot of push for change, if you still look at the most prestigious ballet companies just kind of all across the world, and you look at the ballet dancers that are there, they still do kind of showcase that small-bodied and slender and long-legged body type. And that can be very harmful for, especially younger, more impressionable dancers who don't necessarily like fit that aesthetic. They look around and they see, well, this is what successful ballet dancers are looking like, or even within their class, because they have to wear leotard and tights, very, very tight fitting. They're surrounded by mirrors on all directions, and they're surrounded by other dancers in their class. And so, of course, it's so natural to compare themselves. And if they're not looking like the dancer standing next to them or the dancer they admire, a lot of times they'll internalize that as a fault of their own, of like, oh, I don't look like that. Like, what's wrong with me, and what should I do to fix it? Or that can also come, and a lot of times does come, from teachers or, artistic directors or choreographers, where like still a lot of that commentary is being made. And maybe it's not directly at the dancer, but they'll potentially hear their teachers talking about other dancers in front of them and making comments about like, gaining weight or what the dancer looks like. And then of course they'll default to that comparison of like, well, I look like that dancer, and the teacher is is talking about how that dancer is maybe bigger. And so does that mean they think I'm bigger, and what should I do about it? Or a lot of times it can be just more like direct commentary of I can, like the comment that I think is like most heard is, oh, I can see your lunch, so that's something that's we hear, and I hear from the dancers. I'm still, it's unbelievable. Like even now, because the teachers just say what they heard growing up and what they heard being trained, and they're not coached in like psychologically safe or psychologically informed teaching methods. And so that sort of harmful rhetoric gets passed down. And so like a lot of the thoughts and a lot of the comparisons do exist. And I think something more harmful is, when they start to engage in behaviors of, okay, I need to fit this body type, and I will do like anything it takes to fit into that body type. And so they begin to like sacrifice their health for the sake of aesthetics. And that can definitely have like a profound impact on their psyche and their health, and kind of the trajectory of their health, like within their lifespan. And so a lot of times they are they're subject to lower energy availability. So, I mean, and this always existed in sports. Like we had the female athlete triad, and now it's red S, relative energy deficiency in sport. And thankfully now there's a lot more research being done in the dance world to look into this. But yeah, the statistics are pretty, it's definitely like over 50% of at least like female identifying dancers have some form of red S. And sometimes that is very intentional underfueling, and other times it's maybe unintentional, but it still does come with the negative like health repercussions and consequences. So yeah, I think like we can do an entire podcast on just like body image in ballet and the negative impact it has just like really throughout the dancer's life. But it's still very alarming that I hear about this from the dancers that I work with, and also just kind of like trying to combat that. It's hard, and it definitely does take a team. So if I do hear those kinds of comments being made, or suspecting that like a dancer is engaging in behaviors, it always warrants like a referral to a psychologist and a dietitian and a medical doctor, just so they have that whole team and, are supported holistically. But it is definitely one of the biggest challenges.
We are going to take a quick pause from today's conversation, but we want to use this moment to remind you why Head to Toe Strength does this work.
Our mission was born from my lived experience. I was disowned for who I loved, dismissed and harmed by medical bias, and worked inside fitness centers that only push diet culture over real care.
Head to Toe Strength exists to build the kind of support you need right now, a place where every body, every identity, and every story is fully seen, heard, and supported.
If you are ready to move from feeling stuck and unseen to a place of genuine, holistic strength, if you're ready to stop just surviving and start thriving, we are ready to guide you.
Visit headtotoestrength.com today to book a free introductory call with our team and start your journey with us. That's headtotoestrength.com.
Because our bodies aren't designed to do that.
Right. Yeah.
We're not created to like designed that way. Like if you're a sleek, slender person, you're not all gonna want to be ballerinas. Ballerinas come in all shapes and sizes and dreams, especially when you're 4 and you don't know what 15-year-old you will look like. I just keep seeing Center Stage and Black Swan in my head, because it's like those were years ago, and I feel like they're still just as relevant today if you watched it than you did in the early 2000s when they came out.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, exactly. And like if you look at the companies, and if you look at still what body types are like celebrated and showcased on stage, it makes you wonder like, well, what kind of lengths did they have to take to get there? Because yes, like some individuals do exist in just like naturally smaller bodies, and their BMI is going to fall on the lower side without any kind of like, effort or intervention on their part. But that's pretty like uncommon with just our general population. And if that's all we're seeing in these ballet companies, then I mean, it is a self-selecting art form, but it's still a lot of times does require the athletes or the artists to sacrifice a good amount of their health. And sometimes it's without them even like knowing that they're doing that. It's something that they're like, well, this is how I know dancers eat. And again, still ignoring their internal cues because they were never taught to kind of have that self-trust.
Sounds very similar to gymnastics.
Yeah.
I mean, the body types in gymnastics are allowed to be muscular, but they're not allowed to be that muscular, because like I worked with a gymnast for a little while, and it's like, here's your scoop of peanut butter or your spoonful of peanut butter and then all your supplements for all your nutritional deficiencies, because you can't get fat. And it sounds very, very similar to that. So is the mindset the same-ish?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I would say so. And it does depend on like the school and the teachers and their just current understanding of health. But there is a lot of still like misinformation about diets and, about like sustainability overall. So yeah, what's passed down may not have any sort of like background in science or what we know to be true, but it's just been like carried on for so long, and so that narrative still persists.
Like the similarities between like eat this little but perform this high level, here's a handful of supplements for all your nutritional deficiencies because we don't actually want you eating to replace your nutritional deficiencies.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, I mean, thankfully there are dietitians out there doing great work and pushing the standard forward and really pushing for the awareness of what a healthful diet and what adequate replenishment does look like. But still, like I think a lot of dancers are misinformed or just don't know like how much they truly have to consume. And so what might actually be like adequate for their demands and how much they're dancing, they might perceive to be a lot, but it's actually like necessary for them to be able to perform at the level that they are. And it's true. It's like now companies are wanting their dancers to be muscular, but it's like we still have the comments made of, well, you don't want to be too bulky. Or even with, some of the dancers that come in that I see, they don't tell their teachers that they're coming to see me because their teachers do make comments of, oh, you don't want to do that. You're going to get too bulky. And it's just like Bethany, I think we've talked about it. It just could not be farther from the truth. And, when they come to see us, we make an effort. I mean, there's really like no reason to discuss bodies or what your body looks like because it's separate. Like what we're doing is for your strength and your health and your longevity, and the way your body looks has really like nothing to do with that. But there is definitely like concern from teachers and parents of any sort of strength training will just automatically result in you becoming bulky. And that's problematic for them because, bulky dancers are just inherently a problem. And so, yeah, there are so many like issues with that. And also thinking about how it affects their approach to training and exercise outside of dance and in the long term. When we know that like they need to be resistance training, they need to be lifting heavy throughout their lifespan, having always those thoughts in the back of their mind. And okay, well, if I start to increase my weight, like what will that mean for my body? And that in itself can be like extremely harmful for them because they're just never going to be exposed to that sort of heavy lifting.
Well, and also the psychology behind that. Like, if you've been a certain frame and a certain size your whole life, just even the thought of like a pregnancy is like terrifying because now you're going to be fat and you're going to completely transform, and you've been taught since you were 3 that's not acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and it's always that emphasis placed on what you're looking like versus like what you're doing and truly like what the output is. And it can be this, amazing creation and self-expression, just like on so many different levels. But it's still like you're never going to acknowledge your body for that if you're just so critical of still like what it's looking like. And even fostering gratitude, I think, is such a like radical concept with dancers. I mean, I really do try to have them see that of like your body is sustaining you through so much and you are asking so much of it. And when are you looking inward and replenishing that and like actually thanking your body for everything it's going through? And even when I begin to kind of introduce that, I think dancers are like, what? Like I could do that. I can feel proud of myself. But that's what we need to be instilling. And that's what needs to be first, of like they do this out of like a celebration of their bodies and out of a true like love for their bodies and an enjoyment of movement and self-expression, and just acknowledge like everything that their body will carry them through, not just in dance, but just like in life. And so, yeah, there's so much like work that needs to be done there. And that's why we really think that dancers just need like support through kind of all different facets of like definitely that psychological support and like the physical aspects, and people there who like truly care for them as individuals and as humans, instead of just like what their output is and how they're looking as dancers and on stage, and only thinking about their dancer identity.
All right, I was just going to say that was so well said, Claire, because that makes me think of my phrase whole person.
Yeah. And I always try to just get to know the person in front of me, like for the human they are. And so like, yes, you're coming here and it is dance prehab and we are, helping you become a more like healthy dancer. But really it's like the hope is that we're instilling these lifelong lessons about how you approach the care for your human self.
Can you back up just a little bit? Because you mentioned the female athlete triad and said red S. Did that change?
So I feel like from my understanding, red S is the evolution of the female athlete triad.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that. I haven't heard that yet. So I didn't know that female athlete triad had like evolved into something further, which is great. But can you kind of, in the non-exercise science bachelor degree background, explain that for those of us who do not have that bachelor's degree, as Aria raises her hand. So we don't need to talk clinically. You and I can talk clinically off air, but for like Aria and everyone else in the world who didn't spend their lives studying these things, can you break that down?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So I think with sport or any kind of physical activity, there does come the risk of, how much you're giving out, like your output not matching your input. And so the female athlete triad was coined, specifically like for the female athletes when they are under fueling or not taking in enough to support like how much they're outputting. There are definitely consequences. And so with the triad, I believe it's irregular or missed period amenorrhea, low bone density, which it can exist on a spectrum. I mean, bone stress injuries can happen, and then that can become a stress fracture. And later in life, you're more at risk for developing osteopenia and then osteoporosis. And then the kind of like the third point of the triangle is just the disordered eating or low energy availability. And and now what we know is that is only a small portion of what's affected when you're consistently under fueling. You may not see a missed period before the other things sort of start to take into effect. And it has a lot of different sort of consequences, maybe like GI disruption or a lot of like mental health effects, or just generally feeling like lethargic and fatigued. Burnout can be a consequence of underfueling. So now Red S just encompasses a lot of different systems that are affected within your body, and also recognizes that males can very much deal with it too. I mean, it's not as common with males, but there is always that risk. And, for dancers, like I mentioned, this can be intentional, where they are wanting their bodies to look a certain way, and therefore they're going to restrict on their caloric intake, or just because of how many hours they're dancing and not knowing what is appropriate to take in, like then they are just kind of putting themselves in that energy deficient state. And then we'll still see those kind of same consequences. But yeah, it's not just noticing like, oh, I'm feeling tired and my performance is decreasing. It does affect pretty much like every system within your body.
When I spent years under eating and over exercising, and I never lost my period. So like the fact that it should not be one of the standard things to look for is if you have a loss of menses, you should be feeling more of the like brain fog, tired, kind of like drunk almost, like not being able to form a thought. You can't, like, even let's say, because you've got your choreography memorized, and then all of a sudden you can't remember any of the steps. Like, it's going to be more along those lines, because even with bodybuilding and everything, like, yeah, I exercise, and that brings to my point too, you physically cannot be bulky. It's physically, scientifically impossible because of the type of muscle you're putting on and how underfueled you are. You physically can't. It's not biologically, scientifically, physiologically, and all the ologies. It's not possible.
Yes, no. And just telling them, yes, you have to be training in such a specific way, and you are so far away from that to even, get into the realm of, I mean, even just like building muscle, right? Like, you need the nutrients and the building blocks in order to just like build a healthy amount of muscle and for like muscular health. And yeah, if you're constantly in that like energy deficient state, I mean, we can't even talk about giving your body more load. Like, we just need to bring it up to a sustainable place. So yeah. And like you mentioned, I think like that marker of missed period is very much like that kind of like the worst part of the spectrum that we would see. There are so many things that we have to pay attention to that will come before the irregular or missed menses, like you said, like just like concentration and memory and irritability. And those are things that we will definitely keep an eye out, and having questionnaires of those sort of things that touch on a lot of the different aspects of what underfueling might look like or might manifest as. And then like educating the parents, educating the dancers, the dance teachers, because sometimes they're just so used to functioning in that state that they don't often perceive it to be abnormal. They're like, well, yeah, I'm dancing like all the time. I'm going to be like moody and tired and burnt out. And then so they often don't make the connection. Energy intake is not sufficient for everything they're doing.
Either of you speak to, like, if someone is underfueling for a very, very long period of time, the damage that could possibly come out of it in the future? Is there a way to fix the damage, or like what are the consequences basically?
Claire's the guest. Claire gets to go off.
I mean, I always like with these kinds of questions, I always am like, okay, I wish we had like a dietitian to bring into the mix, because they could speak so much about this, and an exercise physiologist, which we do have. But from my understanding, yeah, women are a lot more kind of like susceptible to these changes in dietary intake, just because of like different hormones and reproductive function. But yeah, I would say like long-term reproductive function can definitely be impaired. Hormonal health is definitely something that can be impaired. And especially at a time when it's a very critical like developmental period, and you're not taking in the nutrients that you need. Like, that's extremely detrimental to their development. If somebody is underfueling prior to the onset of menarche, a lot of times it's like delayed, or they're not going to hit puberty when they need to, and then that can come with just other sort of health repercussions later on in life. And going back to like with the dance world, a lot of times that is celebrated because we just like the prepubescent body types. And so that's something that's, if a dancer is hitting puberty like earlier than her peers, if she's looking at that and seeing that as something that's like not desired, they might take harmful measures as well. So it's all of those things. The impaired reproductive function, and then definitely the impact on bone health, because, as we give load to the body with jumping or like any sort of thing that the dancer or athlete is facing, the bone will break down, but then it has to build back up. And that's like through the recovery phases. And that's, if you have adequate nutrition to give your bone those building blocks, and if that happens repetitively where the bone is being broken down and not built back up again, that can lend its way into a bone stress injury. And then, like I said, later, like a stress fracture. And those are injuries that you definitely don't want to mess with. And that can come with a lot of negative impact on its own. And, bone might not remodel as well as other like soft or other tissues in the body, or some bone sites might not have good blood flow. And then you risk something like avascular necrosis, which is just like there's no blood getting to that part of the bone. And then surgical intervention might be required, or worse things. So yes. Yeah. And
I like to describe it like pregnancy. Like prepubescent you, little girl, because we're all women, is like feeding a mom who's trying to grow a baby. So I like to use that because everybody can kind of tie how important it is to eat food to nourish the growing fetus. And so I like to use like, well, your mom, right? She had to eat, and she had to eat all of her veggies, and she had to eat all of her rice and her cow and her pig and all the things, if you choose to eat those things, to make sure that you grew healthy and strong. So now if we're the same way, then you probably also still need to eat all of those icky green things that your parents put on your plates that you don't enjoy, because again, you need that synthesis, because if you don't have all of those components to go in, you can't continue to grow bone. You can't, because like when a fetus is growing, you're growing bone, you're growing tissue, you're growing a brain, you're growing a spinal cord, nerves, everything. So I like to use pregnancy as the example, because that is tied with healthy nutrition, and that is tied with mindful eating. That is tied with, if you don't take care of the nutritional component, you may not make it to full gestation. And if you think about it, like if you start your first 12 weeks and let's say, your first trimester is puking and IVs and you want to die and you can't eat. But if second trimester you get yourself back, you still have a healthy 40-week, typically gestational baby. So it like the body is an amazing thing. We flush and we clean cells out between every 24 hours to, I think the stomach lining, or some of them are a little bit longer, like 14 days. Mm-hmm. But everything can be healed. Even like if you're a chronic smoker, you actually can regrow in some of that lung tissue. So if you're 12 and you've done this since you were 18, it's not like, well, this is just my life. I'm going to end up having a total hip done at 40, and I'm going to have a broken hip, and then from here on out for every 5 to 10 years I'm going to be having total hips and total knees. That's the biggest misinformation that's out there, because if a 60-year-old is deadlifting, for example, 350 pounds, she's not huge, but she will not step off a curb and break a hip.
For sure. Yeah.
And that same exact body is what a 12-year-old can do to herself if she isn't properly nourished and properly sleeping and properly hydrated and like all of those different things. But the body is such a fascinating thing. You can heal it just by listening to it.
Mm-hmm. What a powerful message. Wow. I absolutely love that. And I think if every dancer were to know that, we would be in a much better place. They would be in a much better place. And yeah, because they're still so young, there's a lot more leeway, and the habits that they establish at that time are so important, because it's so much easier to stick with that and kind of find that rhythm and that routine and what works for you if you're starting it when you're younger and your body's like a sponge and so malleable and adaptable, like versus, if you do start it later on in life. And that's not to say, bodies are going to adapt like throughout the lifespan. But just if, it really does change the trajectory of like a dancer's career if they are given the right information from an earlier age, and know, like I said before, know how to take care of themselves properly. And yeah, I think a lot of dancers, they don't realize like how much better they're actually going to feel if they do increase calories and if they do increase their nutrition. And because that fear is, I think, potentially like inhibiting them or stopping them from doing that. Sometimes they don't know, they don't get to experience that, and they automatically assume that, oh, this is going to lead to, weight gain or changes in my body. And like, I mean, maybe yes, maybe no, but either way, like, you're going to feel so much better and you're going to perform at such a higher level. And that's a component that, cannot be ignored or undermined. Like, what you do in physical therapy or in your training or in dance cannot take into effect, or you're not going to see like positive impact or benefits from that if the nutritional piece isn't there, and if you're also not like adhering to other pillars of recovery. Like, you can't do what you do without sleep, without nutrition, just all the basic things. And yeah, a lot of times that gets dismissed for just some of the like more fancier things of, it's okay if I don't sleep or I don't nourish myself well. Like, I've got my foam rolling and my cupping, and so I'm good. And yeah, they'll just default to those sort of like attractive recovery methods. Yeah.
But Aria, to your point, I gave myself multiple autoimmune diseases because I starved and overtrained for so many years. Like, I stopped controlling what I ate in middle school. So like middle school, high school, into my 20s. And now like I've got PCOS, and like we've talked about it before on the show, and that's in season 1. But you also have to think like our ovaries are controlling the whole system. Mm-hmm. We have to take care of them, because now like my ovaries, like my periods are really terrible and they're really symptomatic. And then now my thyroid just is kind of like asleep, like overproducing too much TSH, and then my, your thyroxine and your T3, so it's like it kind of throws off the whole balance, because that's the beauty of the endocrine system. The gonads actually drive the car. So if you think about healing and nourishing your gonads, naturally your kidneys are going to act better, which is your adrenals and your pituitary. Like, everybody else kind of follows along, because like sex hormones drive the car. They're the most powerful hormones in the body.
Yeah, no, that is so important. And for females and every athlete, but yeah, like what you said, because there's that, what is it, like hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis that males don't have. So yes. Therefore, like, women are a lot more sensitive to those kinds of changes and fueling. And then it does come with the reproductive negative effects. Yep. The physical effects, the psychological effects are so real. And yeah, on a personal note, like, that's definitely impacted me. I mean, I feel like, I don't know how dancers kind of get out of that or experience the dance world without some sort of maladaptive thoughts about like food, body image. I mean, it's just so like ubiquitous. And I remember thinking too, like, oh, once I'm done with ballet and once I'm just like no longer taking dance class, like I will be free from all of that. I won't have to think about my body. I won't have to think about like what I'm eating. I will just be so free and like, and not be chained down. And yeah, unfortunately, like that's just not true because it exists everywhere. And it's like very, your mind is so powerful. And like when you start having those thoughts from an early age, they just stick with you. And it's something that you actually have to like work very hard to unlearn. And that's the most surprising part for me is like how much of an effort it takes to not succumb to that and to not believe those thoughts and to have the wisdom to like see otherwise and just know that this is not beneficial for me in any way. That's surprising. And just in the world we live in, with all of the messages and all of the standards, especially for females.
Aria, how would you, if a 15-year-old came into our practice and wanted and needed that level of expertise, like what would your very general basic, without giving away your secret sauce, how would that process start? Because it's obviously probably not an easy process.
Yeah, I think what's coming up for me is like what needs to happen first is how do you feel not just physically, but like, how do you feel about yourself? Because there's kind of also like a self-love aspect, and that's how you cut out the noise of the messaging and even like the noise of a certain sport that you're in. It's like, how do you feel about yourself and what are your needs? What are your feelings? And then kind of going from there and editing from there. Because I think like as a teen, it's very different than if I had a client who was like 35 or 40, right? As a teen, they are still developing and they still really, really care about what other people think and what other people say. So I would kind of first start with like, let's talk about what you want for you and what matters to you, and then go from there.
Mm-hmm. And how do you navigate unsupportive, supportive parental units or coaches or teachers?
I feel like I would just have to be a different voice. As it would not be my, that's hard, because it wouldn't be my place to then correct the grown-ups.
Right.
Yeah, so I would have to be kind of like the corrective and supportive voice and say, no matter what these grown-ups are saying to you, I want you to think about you first, and then you can kind of come to a decision that works. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I feel like that's what dance prehab and head to toe strength, that's what we're trying to be for all these young women, young women all the way up until I have retired, non-retired, 70-something women. Like any woman across the lifespan, I feel like that's what we're trying to be, is like her cheering voice, her cheering force of like, yes, please nourish yourself. Yes, please walk outside. Yes, please get 9 to 10 hours of sleep, because this 6 to 7 hour bullshit is a fucking lie in this country. And it doesn't exist, and it's not factual, and it's not based in science, because if an athlete has to sleep 12 hours, you probably need the same, because you are using just as much brain power running whatever you're doing all day long and whatever you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think sometimes just giving them that permission is really, it's very impactful for them as well, because they've never heard it from anybody else before, and they're like, what do you mean I can like actually sleep more, eat more? And to go back to your point, Arya, yeah, like I don't want to also just automatically, dismiss the teacher, dismiss the parent when the dancer is coming to me with these concerns or letting me know what they've been hearing from parents, from teachers. I would just offer them a different perspective. Or like you said, I love how your approach is like the human-centered, and well, how do you feel about this? Because maybe that's the first time that they've ever been asked that, and they've never really had a chance to think about that. And also encouraging their intuition, because, like we're all intuitive beings. And I truly believe that like they actually do know how they feel. They just haven't been given the chance or the environment to even start to think about that. But yeah, I always try to let them know, like, your intuition will guide you, and you actually do know what's best for you. And sometimes it just takes a little bit of time, or it can take an environmental change. And so different like practices can help with that. But it's always a journey, and also just like a lifelong journey, like listening to ourselves and our needs, and that's going to change. That can change like day to day too.
Oh yeah. I put me last all the time. I'm fantastic at doing that. Do as I say, not as I do. But I love the perspective, and I love your idea, because also, even if you're not a dancer and you're listening to this show, you're going to feel all of these things if you own a body. Owning a body still comes with all of these feelings, all of these thoughts. It's just the dance world puts a microscope and a spotlight on it, and it's just kind of like heartbreaking, and we want to be the change that we never got, right? That's why we all do this. We want to be what we never had.
Yep. And I think even, for myself, even having that alternative voice, alternative perspective of someone telling me that this is what is truly, healthful. And this is something that we know can make a difference for the better. Even just like that one person telling me that, I think would have had me thinking, or even given me the permission to think that, okay, this is acceptable, because I hadn't heard that from anybody else or anywhere else. Nobody was, that was just nothing. That was just not something that was, brought forward. So and that's always my hope of I want to be that person that I didn't have. And so I see so much of myself in every single dancer that I see and I treat. And even if you're not a dancer, like Bethany said, you're a human with a human body. And giving yourself permission to feel the way that you're going to feel, and to also respond to how you're going to feel and trust in what you're feeling it shouldn't be a radical concept, but it kind of is.
I think it is, because I didn't really experience it until I started working with Bethany as her client. Because when you go through your day to day, I never would listen to myself and listen to what my body was trying to tell me. I just did the task at hand, whatever I was focused on. And that's, I don't want to go into my stuff about humans shouldn't be working, because I've talked about that a lot. Mm-hmm. But it was more of that. And I think that training needs to be unlearned, of you are a human first, and you are in your body 100% of the time for the rest of your life. So learn to listen to it and learn to work with it and see what you need. And that's the part that you were saying, Claire, that is how it's going to last your lifetime. Mm-hmm. The longevity piece.
Yes. Yeah. And that reminds me, we work with a dietitian, Melissa Pearson, who's also a yoga teacher. And she would always say to be a student of your own body. And I just love that, because that's what we are. I mean, we're not going to get it perfect. We're always learning, and things are just going to change with seasons and with where we're at. And it's a lifelong learning process.
And we live in these bodies 24/7, 365 until we go into the ground. So none of what we are talking about today is a luxury. It's a necessity. The screens, the phones, the podcasts, the consumption of media is the luxury. Taking care and putting yourself first is not. Because if you want to stay on this earth happily, healthfully, joyfully, with a strong community, you have to be coming to see clinicians like us.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, 1,000%. And I just love the messaging that you guys put forth of doing things for yourself out of love and out of compassion, and, never out of punishment. And for females and in the exercise world, that's still what we hear, of beating yourself to the ground and pushing more, and just having that self-discipline to be always doing more, and you're not working hard enough, and then there's never that space or that time to listen to yourself, to give yourself replenishment or recovery. And I bet you both see that a lot as well, just with the women that you work with, and having to help them unlearn everything that they have heard.
Just women at work and as moms, it's the same. You don't listen to yourself. You don't take care of yourself. It's the same. It's just about everyone else all the time.
I love the intersection of what all three of us do. And even though we might not be seeing the same clientele, the same sort of themes do exist. And we are doing what we can to, continue to set a new standard and uphold that. I love that you offer a fresh perspective as well, because I think for myself, I identify like as a physical therapist, and therefore I'm like looking at other physical therapists to learn. But a lot of the times what informs me most, or what I learn from most, is those in careers separate from mine. So yeah, thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you for being with us for this powerful conversation. We hope it gave you the knowledge and the clarity you need for your month.
If you found yourself nodding along today, don't keep this to yourself. Share this episode with a woman who needs to be reminded that her story is valid and she is not alone.
You can find all links to our guests, the resources we mentioned, and of course, the direct link to Head to Toe Strength in the blog show notes.
We'll be back next month to continue bringing you out of the maze and back to your center. Until then, remember to be seen, be heard, and keep choosing the path of genuine strength. Take care.